For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. I'm Surya Gangadharan. Good evening. And this evening, our subject of discussion is our eastern neighbor, Myanmar. As you're aware, this is 1 year since the coup which overthrew the government of Aung San Suu Kyi. The military has been in power since, and the country is in pretty much chaos from the reports we read. Let me give you a brief update on what the situation in Myanmar presently is. I have a small graphic for that. According to the United Nations, 1,500 people have died in the conflict so far. Nearly 9,000 are in army custody where torture is routine. Aung San Suu Kyi, the democracy icon, remains in prison, and a united domestic opposition to the military regime is still in the works, may take time to emerge. And some sanctions have been imposed on the regime, but not enough to persuade it to back off from the course it has set for itself. So that's the update I have for you. I'd like to welcome our guest for this evening, Dr. James Gomez. He's from the Asia Center in Bangkok. He's the regional director. He's looking at Myanmar from a range of perspectives, including the humanitarian. And Dr. James, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Thank you, Surya. Lovely to be on the program, Jess. I look forward to our conversation, to getting your viewers updated on developments since the last 1 year following the coup in Myanmar.
Dr. James, it's been a year since the coup. Sitting where you are in Bangkok, would you be able to describe the situation on the ground there? Is it a full-blown civil war?
Yes, we have heard the term civil war baited around, and perhaps for your viewers and listeners' sake, I would like to signpost a political timeline. I want to point to 2023, where the military junta has announced they will be looking to hold elections. I think this is something that slips most commentators and viewers, when we track developments in Myanmar. So to me, how I will label it, I'll call what's happening in Myanmar the long resistance, and the civil disobedience. The civil struggle, including armed struggle, is part of the long resistance. It does, just because the military said it is going to have elections in 2023 doesn't mean it will hold it. It will hold an election if and when it can steal it. But still, I think the timeline is important for us to keep in mind that this resistance is going to be long drawn. And that's the state of play. In the last 1 year, a variety of resistant actors, I would call them, the civil disobedient movements, mostly urban and made up of the young, the professionals, whether they are nurses, doctors, engineers. They have called an industry strike, and some of the medical personnel have gone underground to continue to provide medical care for affected people. And finally, of course, the armed resistance. Now, the armed resistance has taken a strengthening simply because the young people have found that the civil disobedience path, while important, has not been effective, and they needed another push by getting involved in the arms struggle as well.
No, we hear reports that the Myanmar army has also been fairly brutal in its treatment of its own ethnic, the Burmans, the ethnic Burmans. And to that extent, perhaps even the loyalty of the dominant ethnic group in Burma to the army has changed or is shifting. Is this accurate?
Well, I think the way to understand, really, I think, Surya, you got that on the nail there. It's the military. The military is a clique and a class of its own. If we zoom out and look at other militaries in the region, such as in Bangladesh or in Indonesia or in Thailand, for a matter of comparison, they are a special breed. They have allegiance to the training barracks where they come from. They have allegiance to the regions of military duties to which they are posted to. So they are a fraternity. So if you are not with the fraternity, then you are against. So it doesn't matter if whether you are from the same ethnic group or even the same religion, but as long as you are against the fraternity, then you will be out of favor. So why is that so? It's simply because the people of Myanmar, and that's across all ethnic groups and religions, have kind of turned against the military. So the military is one of the militaries in the region with the most bad rap. It's the most unpopular among its own people. And it's holding itself together simply because of the years of socialization it has been able to ingrain through the core of military personnel. At the same time, it's able to hold the young soldiers together through the provision of food, pay, and obviously, lots of, discipline or punishment and to seek compliance. So you can see it in the faces, in the video clips, whenever, things get, sort of transmitted out of the country. So that is why, the military is turning against anyone really who's not friendly to the core.
So logically, that should lead to it losing ground.
Well, it could lose ground if it didn't have a supply of arms. And here's the interesting part, because analysts would say, and correctly, of course, that Russia trains the specialists and the skilled elements of the military personnel in Myanmar from the hundreds to the thousands. We also know publicly that the military gets support in terms of arms and resources, military resources from China. But what is not publicly discussed is China leverages on all actors. So it also supports the rebel groups. Now, that doesn't come out very clearly in our discussion. So because China plays the leveraging game, right? So it will, eventually, play with the winner, right? So it's leveraging, hedging its bets, and supporting not only the military, but also the ethnic rebel groups, especially the ones towards the north. So in that sense, you will see that even though in terms of public goodwill, popularity, PR, and all of that, it's weak, it can stay on by sheer brutal force because it's getting resources. This is why the international community, got its eye on the ball by trying to articulate, lobby, and advocate that arms are not provided and to try to starve off. But as long as China feeds, I think, and it's feeding all sides, we will see the conflict going on.
So, what about the other ethnic groups, the Chin? And I understand many of them are ranged against the military. Is there an alliance of some kind on the ground?
Well, there is some limited alliance. We hear about the Karini group, that has, come together. There will be some level of cooperation. But then again, territorially, they are also dispersed, always around the fringes of Myanmar. And that's why, the idea was always to have a federal state. So I think there may not be some kind of a national resistance, but I think there will be some form of coordination. Here, I want to point to the Exile National Unity Government. It's trying very hard, doing its rounds with its dispersed representatives, around the world, trying to gain recognition and legitimacy. but at the same time, it has also articulated some form of, cautionary support to the armed struggle, and it has stated its position. It has said so simply to ensure that any armed struggle also complies with international standards, in terms of those affected by the war, prisoners of war, women and children, the disabled, and just to guard against the atrocities that the military regimes always, get into when they move on a war path. And we have seen it, many examples of the military going berserk in the region and resulting in a lot of civilian casualty, often their own countrymen and women.
Mhm. But given that I know ASEAN has made some efforts to reach out, Hun Sen was there, but given that ASEAN governments themselves range from the authoritarian to dictatorships, I mean, what value can you place on that outreach?
Well, I think not very much, I'm afraid.
Yeah.
Um, it's really, it's a two-phased approach. You know how diplomacy is.
Yeah.
You say nice things, and say you are with the people, and then on the side you're doing deals, running businesses and selling arms. If you're Singapore, you will point at a UN envoy, and the envoy will speak in terms, supportive of, sanctions. But then the nominating state would not actually act. So I think this is a problem, of course, not only to ASEAN states, but for
True.
many. Um, the coalition of the willing is small. You have the US, the UK, Canada, New Zealand. It's small. And although they're willing and they have announced fresh sanctions to mark the 1 year coup, but it's really, not going to be effective. So we are really looking at a long resistance. I don't think the resistance can be easily quelled. Human nature is such. The spirit is so resilient. No matter how much you throw at it, it always thrives. So in that sense, I think the way I would describe the tragedy in Myanmar, is one where the resistance is long. And, I see the gist as, also aptly labeled this segment, Myanmar tragedy without end. And I think it's extremely telling in terms of what's happening in Myanmar.
Do you discern any chinks in the army's armor? Any, openings? Any defections? High-level defections?
Well, yeah, we had in the early days news of, young people, among the police and also the military sort of absconding or, becoming turncoats and all of that. But I think that has not been significant enough, because as long as the military has access to resources, and that's another thing, it can continue to fund its project, or persecution of its own people to ensure it stays in power. So that's another tap that needs to be turned off. Apart from the supply of military hardware and related resources, is the financial resources, because they are doing business.
Yeah.
So again, we hear of, Chevron, we hear of, Telenor, and even, some Japanese companies, so they're leaving Myanmar. But how much real impact is it going to be?
Yeah.
Because you have other countries in ASEAN, making public statements, but still, doing business. And then you have other countries, India included, also, wanting to do business, wanting to have its strategic position. I think India is caught between a rock and a hard place. Wanting, once bitten some years ago, when it spoke out against the atrocities,
Yeah.
and also the detention of Aung San Suu Kyi. And then I think the foreign policy hacks, in the Indian bureaucracy, they would have advised and said, let's, play nice and take the middle
Yeah.
path. But really, Suraya, you would know better. You're on the ground. Who's really, is it
Politics.
really, yeah, led by the foreign policy bureaucrats or the political leaders with the political will? And I think
Yeah.
that's where India and the Indian people have to decide in terms of how they want to respond to their eastern neighbor.
Well, basically, there's a huge security thing about India's northeast, and we had a spate of attacks in that part of the that part in the eastern region, and some of it is blamed on the Myanmar army being preoccupied with other pacification efforts in other parts of that country. So let me get to this point about India. How is India's outreach? We've had some outreach to the Naypyidaw, to the generals. The foreign secretary was there. Earlier, we had even the army chief going across. We even transferred a submarine. How is India's outreach seen?
Well, I mean, the the thing is, India's outreach doesn't receive the publicity it requires. Uh, you know, India has historically been very much part of the region. It shaped the historical culture and so on. But a lot of that has been cynicized. So
Mm.
to approach Southeast Asia with a historical lens and a certain romanticism of India's glorious contribution to the culture of the
Yeah.
region, it's simply that. It's a romantic notion because the reality on the ground is that the whole region is extremely cynicized. So if you come to the ground and this last couple of days is auspicious because we are in the Lunar New Year celebrations. And if you come to Southeast Asia, you go to the major cities, it's red, ripe with oranges.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
will not see the same type of celebration of an Indian tradition
Mm.
in any part of the region unless it is organized and often in a small scale by the Indian diaspora community. So
Yeah.
that would clearly frame where India is in terms of its political and public relations positions. But that's not to say that this cannot be enhanced. I think it has to have a more strategic view and a more regular engagement, which means it will also have to put more resources into the public engagement. Because I move around the region quite well, and I know some of the outreach the Indian embassies do. Those outreach must go beyond a translation of the Indian Constitution in local languages, or the establishment of a small, India corner in libraries where young people don't use and go to. So if that is the level of outreach the Indian embassies are doing in the region, then just doesn't cut it. So I think you need a lot more resources, a lot more sophistication, and you need, innovative foreign officers policy who, need not go to, call up Delhi, every time, somebody comes up to the embassy with a, interesting little proposal. Yeah.
Mhm. Very interesting because we have a question from Mehul Lad who is asking how does India balance its national and security interests with the support for democracy and the people? I think you've partly answered that.
Well,
Anything you would like to add here?
yeah. I would just, that's a great question, Mehul. And I think we need to think about India's role in the Indo-Pacific region and whether India's foreign policy is values-based. Now, I think you can be values-based without compromising a national national interest and security interest. But the thing to ask is it values based, in terms of democracy and human rights, or is it a vacuum, right? Because if it's just a vacuum based on national interest and security interests without values, then it'll be a very, very follow Horn policy. And I think that's where India has an edge to distinguish itself in the region. If you take a very pragmatic, hollow approach, you don't stand out. And the Indian heartbeat, has values, has spirit, has energy, and I think the country, the nation, would not stand very much, anything that is done, in a hollow manner without passion and inner strength. And I think this is something that India can look to moving forward in terms of how it engages in the region.
So I have one more question from Omkar Dadpe. He's asking, how will this year be for ASEAN versus Myanmar with a China-friendly Cambodia holding the chair?
Yeah, fantastic question. And I think, things are already in play. You can see Hun Sen has made his run with the envoy in his hand, the ASEAN envoy to Myanmar. And he said, he will, as expected, make an invitation to the military general, now acting as prime minister of a government that has no support even among its people. So we will see, I think, more attempts to include Myanmar. However, the problem with being an ASEAN chair is your days are numbered the minute you start. So, Hun Sen already has 11 months left on the clock. And in addition to his own internal problems of, trying to run an election, he's got a communal and general election, and he has disbanded the opposition and independent media. So he will have some answering of his own to do internally. At the same time, there's also discussion that the sign of dynastic politics in Cambodia, where perhaps one of his sons may become a front runner for the top job. So between all of that, I can see the 11 months, moving very fast, with the long resistance, set to, firmly rooted in Myanmar. I think Hun Sen's political time will be up, very soon.
On that note, Dr. Gomes, pleasure talking to you. Great perspective. And I'm sure our viewers would have found this very interesting. Our viewers too have contributed. Thank you so very much, Doctor. We'll get back to you again at some point. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Lovely to be on the program, The Gist. Thank you.
And for all of you out there who've been following us on our YouTube channel, thank you. Subscribe to our channel. Follow us keep coming to us with your comments and observations. Follow us on social media, Instagram and Twitter. Thank you very much. Good night.